Let's talk about a different classification of drugs. Let's talk a little bit about stimulants. Stimulants act in the reverse of depressants. Rather than decrease neural activity, stimulants increase neural activity. Stimulants are a widely used drug, driven in no small part what we have pictured here, the coffee bean. And coffee is a mechanism to get caffeine. Caffeine is a stimulant that increases neural sensitivity, it increases wakefulness, it increases concentration, it decreases the need for sleep, right? But caffeine, even though it's widely accepted and sold in all stores in a variety of forms, in fact, it's sold to children and adults alike, so it has a high social acceptance, it is still a drug, and you have a neurological adaptation to it. And many people who consume a lot of caffeine find that they have to consume more and more and more to get its positive effects. That's tolerance, which means that addiction is developing. And what you'll often find is people who have a strong caffeine addiction require that caffeine to even be normal. That's where you'll get people that say, don't even talk to me till I've had my first few cups of coffee in the morning, right? Just to be normal, just to feel like you used to feel before you started drinking the caffeine requires the presence of the caffeine. And if you want any of that sort of uptick of concentration and energy, you require even more, right? So it's a drug and the nervous system adapts to it. And withdrawals, headaches, emotional instability, anger, tiredness, lethargy, all come as withdrawal symptoms when you stop trying to consume caffeine. Other stimulants include things like cocaine that act predominantly on the dopamine system, right? We talked about dopamine as part of our neurotransmitter discussion. They actually block reuptake, which causes dopamine to be present in the system for a longer amount of time, causing this sense of sort of excitement and euphoria and reward in everything the person does. When we look at the presence of dopamine receptors in the brain, though, we can see that the body is adapting again to the presence of the drug. So what we have here is a PET scan, right? The closer to red we are, the higher the concentration of dopamine receptors. And what you can see in a non-drug user, in that reward center of the brain, we have a strong concentration of dopamine receptors. In the person who uses cocaine, that has actually been reduced dramatically. This means that the person who has a history of cocaine use can no longer really experience reward and excitement and enjoyment in life. It's been removed from them unless they have the drug present. Right? That's the withdrawal. As they take more and more cocaine, it requires the presence of cocaine just to be normal. In other words, for this person to feel enjoyment, to feel excited, to feel a sense of reward or accomplishment, now requires the use of cocaine. Right? The brain adapts to the presence of the drug. Similar in effect to cocaine is methamphetamine. Methamphetamine, though, has a much longer time. It's about 8 hours for its peak effect compared to about 45 minutes for cocaine. But methamphetamine wrecks the brain and the body even more so than cocaine does. Right? It tends to cause what we call stereotyped behavior. This is caused because people actually lose goal-directed action. Right? If I were to ask you, why might you vacuum your carpet? Well, your response would probably be to clean it, to live in a cleaner environment. And once you vacuum your carpet and your environment is cleaner, you feel better for it. You get a reward for it. Somebody on cocaine or methamphetamine, though, loses that goal-directed activity. Actions and behaviors get divorced from goals, right? You were vacuuming your carpet in order to have a clean environment. Somebody in the midst of a methamphetamine high might grab the vacuum, start going to town for it. An hour later, you're like, hey man, why don't we plug it in and at least do some vacuuming? You're like, no, I'm good. I don't need it plugged in. Right? Because their goal is not simply to vacuum, to have a clean room. They've just grabbed something, they've started doing it, and the drug is what's creating the reward. Right? So the activity, the behavior of just moving an unplugged vacuum against the carpet can become rewarding. Right? You just hand them a shovel and they'll go outside and start digging. Why? Well, they don't need a reason, right? The behavior itself becomes rewarding because of the presence of the drug. So you'll get these stereotypes behaviors. One of the worst is skin picking. They'll just take their nose and they will pick at their face, they'll pick at their body, they'll pick at their arm, they'll dig little holes in themselves. The methamphetamine then wrecks the immune system, which means that those little holes that they pick into themselves become infected. You lose the collagen and other structures in your face, in your skin, in your muscles, and in the end, you can have a complete breakdown of the body and the mind. A horribly destructive drug. And this is the example of those sort of before and after pictures you get with methamphetamine use, where they don't even look like the same person. It can be a horribly destructive drug. Continuing in our discussion of stimulants, we have MDMA, commonly referred to as ecstasy. The one important point, what is sold as ecstasy on the street, when tested, it can be a wide range of substances and is very rarely pure MDMA. There are often a lot of chemicals that people put in them, including fentanyl. All right, we already talked about that. So we're going to be talking, though, about just MDMA. Right? MDMA is a stimulant, but it's also a bit of a hallucinogen. It bridges that gap. It creates the stimulant effect by increasing dopamine, as we talked about with cocaine and methamphetamine, but it also dramatically increases serotonin, which turns out to be linked to hallucinatory experiences. Right? So there is also a change in perception that goes along with it as well. Right? This can lead to increased sensitivity to any kind of stimulants, touch, taste, smell. Right? You'll often find people who take the drug will enjoy strong smells or sensations. They may put mentholatum on their chest to just get that smell. Right? They like bright lights. They like any kind of touch. Anything that elicits sensory perception is often very rewarding, and it feels very good to them. It is a drug that is most often associated with party scenes. It can be very dangerous, though. It increases your heart rate, increases your blood pressure, it causes dehydration, and when combined in an environment where that's likely to be occurring anyway, like in a rave or a club or in any kind of situation where there's crowds or dancing, that increases dehydration and blood pressure and heart rate. You combine that, people can collapse in tachycardia, they can become severely dehydrated, it can kill them. Right? So it can be a dangerous drug. One of the things you see with ecstasy, unlike almost any drug we've talked about here, we haven't talked about the acute neurotoxic effect of a lot of these drugs. Long-term use of these drugs create adaptation, changes and damage to the brain, but ecstasy can show almost immediate neurotoxic effect. What we're going to look at is we're going to look at slices of brain tissue of monkeys that were given a dose of MDMA. Specifically, we're looking at what are called 5-HT neurons. These are neurons that are involved in the serotonin system and therefore, help things like sensory perception and mood regulation. The first image is normal 5-HT neuronal growth. The second image is 2 weeks after an MDMA dose, and the third is 7 years after. And hopefully what you see is the dramatic neuronal toxic effect of MDMA. It shreds this system. Even 7 years after the dose, the brain is not fully recovered. And this leads to a problem with people who take ecstasy, and often doesn't take that many doses for this to begin to occur, is you get a point where the serotonin system in the brain begins to collapse. This tends to lead to long-term depression that is difficult to control, because there is just not the neural system present anymore. So antidepressants can't have an effect, right? Anything we know that can improve brain and brain chemistry is not effective in treating the depression associated with widespread MDMA use. It is a very, very scary drug.